FDIC and live from the Trustmark Studios, we welcome in for this Monday, fallish day, at least this morning, Douglas Carswell, President and CEO, Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. I'm on great form. How are you?
Good. You have a good weekend?
Wonderful. I watched Ole Miss. I went up to watch them play.
Oh, did you?
An amazing game.
Would you wear blue or did you wear red? Which one did you wear?
I was wearing red. I've just about understood the rules of football, and the more I discover about it, the more I love it.
Well, it's a heck of a lot safer than the football overseas and soccer and things such as that. There's 125 people in that stampede. Indonesia died. Just absolutely crazy.
Terrible.
Let's jump into this because I've got lots to talk to you about. The charter school situation. I was reading something about this, and I was hoping that we'd be further along. I understand the resistance of this. I understand the power we have in this state, not power that we have, but the power of the education lobbyist and the machinery that turns from the parents' campaign to people who want to feed off of public education. But it is very, very politically powerful, and we know that.
Yeah.
So where are we? What's your analysis of this?
Let's start with a few basics. I mean, charter schools in pretty much every state where they've ever been tried raise standards and give the kids who go to them a better life chance. Now, the evidence of that is overwhelming. So charter schools are a force for good. Not unreasonably, in order to set up a charter school, you need to get the approval of something called the Charter Authorizer Board. Now, you might imagine that if you were called the Charter Authorizer Board, you would be in the business of approving charter schools. But unfortunately, our Charter Authorizer Board in Mississippi has been cheerfully turning down applications to set up these life-changing schools for a decade. We've only got a mere 8 charter schools in the entire state. Last week, 5 applications went before the board, and 4 of them were turned down. In other words, the board did what it seems to do rather well, which is to say no to people offering life-changing charter schools.
But Douglas, wait a minute. Couldn't you make that argument, and I'm play devil's advocate here, couldn't you make the argument that, okay, this is going to keep the quality of the education of these schools up, the failure rate will be down,
hold
and
on.
we're doing this, and we're putting them through the routine and making darn sure they'll be able to survive.
Hold on a second.
And things are right.
Hold on a second. The argument put forward by the charter school for not approving schools is that some of the applications are imperfect. Do they have any idea quite how imperfect the alternative schools that those children are now having to go to? It's ridiculous. You can, for example, only apply to set up a charter school in an F-rated district. So by definition, if you're turning down an average application to set up a charter school, you're denying children an average education and consigning them to an F-rated education. It's an absurd and nonsensical argument.
I agree with you, and the reason that was done is because it was the only way that the legislature could possibly get this in. We know that because of the forces, the aforementioned forces that I talked about, which I agree with you, because if they would allow them anywhere in, the competition for between them and public schools is going to be a little bit more.
Paul, to see how ridiculous the authorizer board is behaving, just consider for a moment the fact that Georgia has 70 charter schools, Louisiana has 143, Arkansas has 50. Are you really suggesting that the quality of the applications from charter schools in Mississippi is so substandard that we only are able to have 8? The fault is not the quality of the applications. It's not the fault of Mississippi children. It's not the fault of Mississippi mums and dads and teachers. The fault is the bureaucracy that doesn't want these schools because it sees them as a threat to the failing public sector monopoly.
So you're saying that the board itself is
the problem
in existence to be a detractor, not an enabler. In other words, they're not helping; they're hurting this cause.
Its very actions suggest that. It's not me saying it. It's the actions of the board. For a decade, they've been cheerfully rejecting good applications. One of the most disappointing no's that they gave last week was to a school that is already a successful school in Clarksdale that wanted to expand to open up a high school. Now, to say no to that consigns children going to that good school in Clarksdale to, when they get to a certain age, have to go back into F-rated public schools.
So was this also based on the filing itself, or the paperwork being askew or something like that? Is that the reason for that?
Bureaucracy that wants to say no always comes with a reason, but the reason is not a logical, rational reason. If it's the case that some of the applications are far from perfect, then I would have thought that the authorizer board would have a duty to help funnel and nurture and foster some of those applications. Instead, we get a sort of Soviet-style niet, and I think that's simply not good enough. Any politician in Mississippi who wants to regard themselves or be labeled as authentically conservative needs to recognize that we need to change the authorizer board. We need reform. And there are a number of ways in which we can do this. One way would be to allow multiple authorizer boards. Many states in America have this, so you can't have one monopoly institution blocking good applications. That would be one way. Another way would be to make sure that when the authorizer board gives approval, it's not being asked to approve each nitty-gritty individual startup school. It is simply approving an organization to come in and set up and run charter schools. If you like, it would license an organization to be a licensed provider of charter education. And I think now it's imperative that we have both of these reforms. It's not simply good enough to tweak with the dynamics of the board.
She has been on with me before, Dr. Lisa Kamachara, the executive director. Have you spoken with her?
I met her pretty much as soon as I arrived. I've watched intently what the board has done. I don't want to personalize this. There are good people on both sides of this debate. The failure is not individuals, it's the institution. The institution has got too much power to say no, and that needs to change.
Is there an appeal process?
This is one of the frustrating things. If there were objective criteria under which the process operated, you might think that you could take those and they would be sort of actionable. You could go to a court. Unfortunately, the board has the final say. It's just not good enough. As I said at the outset.
So wait a minute, you're saying that there's not an appeal process within the confines of the board itself?
No.
Nor is there a legal remedy for this because of the way they're set up?
The no is final.
Tell me a little bit about, they're staggered in terms, I'm sure. They're appointed by the governor?
Yeah, as is standard in Mississippi, I think the governor has some say, the lieutenant governor has some say. I think the speaker may have some say. But, let's not personalize it. I don't want to get into the business of saying, that member of the board said this or this CEO. They're individuals, and I don't think that would be right. I think what politicians need to do is to change the institution and focus on how to reshape the institution. If we were having this conversation in Louisiana, where they've got 143 charter schools, or Arkansas where they've got 50, or Georgia where they've got over 70. The idea that a single institution could block the creation of charter schools would be ludicrous. So we need, let's not focus on individuals. Let's change the institution.
Are we the only ones that you know of that you've looked into this? And again, my guest is Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, are we the only one that you know of in the surrounding states, Louisiana and the others that you mentioned, that base their approval on being an F-rated school, first of all?
There are other states which, for much the same reason, said that you can only set up a charter school in areas where education is seen to be substandard. I personally think that the problem with that is it means that charter schools only ever get going as in failing neighborhoods, and they come to be seen as being a thing you do for failing neighborhoods, and I think that's wrong. I would like to see if people want to set up a charter school in an A-rated district, they should be allowed to, because ultimately it's not about the bureaucrats deciding whether a charter school is successful or not. It's the mums and dads, and every charter school in Mississippi is oversubscribed. Let parents vote with their feet. Let them decide if the charter school is good enough for their child.
You can't have that in Mississippi, because if you have that in Mississippi, the next thing you're talking about is vouchers or public school choice. That's
and what, every Mississippian having the same choices that currently only rich Mississippians have?
You just can't have that
what's
in
the
the state of
downside with
Mississippi, because it just would not work because of the powers that be. I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm being sarcastic, but it's a long time coming. I think it's got to happen. The only way it's got to happen, Douglas, is that if the African Americans in our state, the poorest of the poor, the ones that we're talking about, low unwed mothers, et cetera, and we'll talk more about that later. If they start unifying and said we want public education choice where we put our kids, and charter schools and anything else, then there is a possibility, but it's going to take a while. I'll talk more about this when we come back with Douglas Carswell. Next. Let me get back to Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So let's put a wrap on this one, Douglas. What do we do? Because public policy is going to be ground zero when it comes to the 2023 session with everything going on, this, and how do we handle the results of Dobbs as far as public policy is concerned. But let's put a wrap on the charter school. What are your plans and the plans of the organization to at least offer some advice and wisdom going forward in 2023?
Well, there are a lot of good organizations out there like Mississippi First and others, Embark, who are encouraging new charter schools and charter school applications, and I think that's wonderful. I think in terms of public policy, though, what we need to do is put forward proposals and a bill for multiple authorizer boards. If a monopoly public sector organization after a decade is not up to the job of approving enough charter schools, end its monopoly. It's very simple.
That doesn't really make sense, though, when you're talking about competing governmental
No, I think
boards.
Other states have public universities, allowing public universities to approve charter schools, and I think that would be something that needs to be explored. If it's not just the official state-sanctioned authorizer board, but if a public university in Mississippi could also approve a charter school, I think that would fix a lot of the logjam.
Wouldn't it be better to go back and just write a new bill to change some of the rules and regulations of the present charter board?
Yeah, I mean, as I explained in the earlier segment, I think that is needed. I think changing the way in which they approve so that they're not simply approving individual applications to set up charter schools, but they're giving an organization, if you like, a license to go ahead and run charter schools. I think that's absolutely key. Yeah.
A lot of people still to this day do not understand what a charter school is, and we get into a pushing and pulling match that a charter school is not a public school. It is a public school.
It's publicly
it derives its money from the public funds.
Yeah, it's publicly funded, but it's run independently of the local education bureaucracy.
And there is the rub right there. The autonomy goes to the parents
exactly.
and the people who put that together, and it bypasses the machine, and they don't like that because they lose some of the wherewithal to direct funds.
Well, the existing establishment sees it as a threat. Number one, because the money that goes to the charter schools doesn't go to prop up the existing system. Secondly, because charter schools tend to be much more efficient at how they spend their money. They actually spend it in the classroom rather than this expensive local school board bureaucracy. And I think the third reason why they don't like it, it shows them up. Because for years, people in Mississippi have been told that certain kids in certain neighborhoods can never achieve great results. And charter schools come along and show that they can. And suddenly people realize it's not the kids that are the problem. It's an education system that has a poverty of ambition and aspiration.
You know, we also have this. The argument has always been, wait a minute, if you do this, you're going to kill the other schools. They'll just die, and you got all. And that's proven to be false. As a matter of fact, in every case that we've seen, it's proven that those other schools begin to do better.
But opponents of charter schools and school choice can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, say there's no demand for these charter schools and why have them, and then people say, hang on, if you set up charter schools, people are going to leave the existing schools and the money is going to follow them. You can't have it both ways. I mean, if it is the case that setting up charter schools means that they're going to be oversubscribed and mums and dads and kids families are going to want to send their children there, then doesn't that tell you something about the alternatives that you're providing them?
Well, I think Mose on our C-Spire text line at 601-879-4395 has the wisdom of Moses. And Mose basically says we need to be asking the board why they are intent on keeping our children in failing school districts.
He's got it.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell right there.
He's bang on the money.
If you think because of your inaction things are going to get better, then you maybe shouldn't be on that board, period. I do want to ask you about this and talk a little bit about this one. The Senate Study Group, and I'm catching you cold on this one, so the Senate Study Group on Women, Children, and Families opened the first of four series. They're going to have 4 hearings with an examination of the extent of the problem on what is going on in the state of Mississippi. And we're talking about one of the boards or one of the meetings in the Senate that the lieutenant governor wanted to put together. Just how are we going to face this? Now, we all worked hard to get Roe versus Wade overturned. Everybody prayed for this. But that's just the beginning of this. We could have 5,000 babies born in the state of Mississippi who would not be slaughtered, but how do you take care of them? That is our responsibility one way or the other, too. And certainly, you guys at Public Policy are going to be front and center on this one. But Mississippi ranks worst or near worst in infant and maternal mortality. We rank worst or near worst in poverty, hunger, access to health care, child care, many other pertinent statistics. 39% of children in our state belong to households with no full-time working parents. When I read this, I'll be honest with you, it's not the first time because I've said this before on the air. I think I reflect a lot of people in this audience. We get a little tired blaming it on us. In the way these stories are written, and I'm not saying anything about the study group, don't get me wrong, but the way the stories are written when you hear it, it's almost like you're not doing enough. And it's directed at the taxpayer who should be paying more taxes. You know, you could be, celebrating your golden anniversary or something, but still you are blamed for the unwed mothers out there. And I know we shouldn't take it that way, but a lot of times the ones of us who are working our butts off are being told by the people that we're not doing enough.
It's interesting because Mississippi has a lot of these metrics that show, infant mortality is one of the highest in the country, and the child poverty, and all these negative metrics. Often the argument is that this is evidence that we need more state action and we need to do something, and people need to pay higher taxes so we can have more bureaucrats running programs to address these problems. Now, all of that presupposes that government intervention and government action can fix the problems. Actually, I would take issue with that. I would say ever since the Lyndon Johnson advent of the Great Society, government welfare programs and intervention have been part of the problem, not the solution. If you look at why it is that Mississippi in many ways is performing one of the worst states in the union, I would say it's because of things like fatherlessness. It's because there's an absence of dads in homes. It's because of broader social issues, which the state, I don't think, can fix, but the state certainly can make worse by spending large amounts of intervention, which actually is often counterproductive. So I think happy, successful societies are those where government is limited. So the idea that we should tackle these social problems with more federal programs ignores what's happened since the 1960s.
I think everybody understands this, and it's been said by some great African-American leaders in our country over and over. If you want to break the statistic, you stay in school, you get an education, you don't get pregnant early, you get married to two spouses, and those are the ways your statistics increase dramatically. We have 46%. 46% of the children in our state live in a single-parent family.
There's overwhelming evidence, as you said, that if you get the basics right, you form a stable relationship, you have your kids in wedlock, not out of wedlock, and you have a job. It doesn't matter what kind of job it is. You have a job. If you do those three things, the chances of you being poor are minuscule.
Maybe we should do this. We have a final segment coming up in a moment with Douglas, but maybe we should do this. Instead of saying 46% of Mississippi children are in a single-parent household, homes, maybe we should say that 54% of the parents in our state are married, 54% of all are married, and what are they doing right? And attack it from a positive source instead of a negative source. But it just seems like they're blaming that on that we, the people who are paying the taxes, pulling the wagon, are not doing enough. And it just gets tiring somewhere. You have these government programs, but if they're not working, don't do them.
If government programs were so successful, they would have fixed all these problems since the 60s.
Oh, God, we'd be in a utopia now. Final segment's coming up next. Live from the Trustmark Studios, final segment here with Douglas Carswell, President and CEO, Mississippi Center for Public Policy. All right, so to wrap it up, sir, your final thoughts. And what else I didn't have a chance to ask you what else you guys are working on.
We are working on a legislative program for the 2023 legislative session, a big focus on education. One thing I'm really excited about is healthcare. one of the reasons why Mississippi has some of the worst health outcomes in America is because we have got some terribly restrictive protectionist things called Certificate of Need laws. And we're doing a lot of work on trying to get rid of those. We're also going to produce a budget because the fact is Mississippi has a budget surplus of about $1.2 billion. That's even after the income tax cuts earlier this year. So I think there is scope for a really proper conservative budget.
You guys taking an issue or a side as far as the postpartum narrative out there?
Sorry, I missed that.
Postpartum, the legislation to increase the term for postpartum on Medicare or Medicaid from 2 months till 12 months.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to oppose individual measures like that, but in principle, we don't want to see Medicaid or Medicare expansion, because if you hose federal dollars at healthcare in Mississippi while you still restrict the supply, you get massive increase in the costs to everyone else.
But is there a way to not call that Medicaid expansion, or is it just everything is Medicaid expansion on this particular case?
Well, it is Medicaid expansion because it means you're spending more public money and you're not increasing the supply of healthcare. And
but we don't cap. I'm not just push back on this a little bit. We don't cap our, if you fall within the category, if you fall within the household income, and I'm not sure, we have 750,000 people on, I forget what the number is, 200,000, whatever it is, on chips. But if that number, if we have more people who probably is the case now because of the economy, who fall within that poverty guideline, they will qualify for Medicaid, will they not?
Yep.
So that's not a capped number. So is that Medicaid expansion?
Well, I mean, it's expanding the amount of public-funded liability, undoubtedly. And, I mean, the history is that every time you have an estimate as to what the cost is going to be, when you extend entitlement, those estimates prove actually an understatement. So I suspect, perhaps for the reasons you suggest, that you're not going to be able to limit and cap entitlement if
The reason that needs to be looked at again is if we do have 5,000 new babies born here that are not aborted, that's going to be certainly in an area where you're going to have more and more of those babies are going to come from mothers from the impoverished demos or categories, and that probably is going to be a larger problem in 2 or 3 years than it is now.
Undoubtedly.
So somewhere you're going to have to address that.
Undoubtedly. And I mean, I think there's a role for civic society here, because if young mothers are going to bring into this world children and they're going to struggle, then I think there's a responsibility on civic society. And I think in Mississippi, actually, civic society is already responding really, really well to that. There are a lot of initiatives underway to provide mums in that situation with support. But the idea that you default to looking to federal dollars, I'm not sure is the answer.
Well, one of the hopes on this one is that they realize as culture changes a little bit that there's more responsibility on using, safe practices, whatever, or abstinence, and maybe that 5,000 won't be 5,000 if they're unwanted. So who knows what's going to happen, but it is going to be a change. And it's one of those things that we're going to have to contend with one way or the other. Final thoughts, sir?
I think you make a very well-made point. It's difficult to find any fault in what you say. Yeah.
Douglas, always a pleasure, sir. Getting ready for the 2023.
Much.
It'll be here before you know it. Realize we're in October already?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Douglas Carswell, President and